All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The New World. It's your boy Bardo here with Buffy, and today we'll be taking a deep dive into some movies. So, the DC universe has entered a promising new era under the guidance of James Gunn, marked by the critical and audience acclaimed project Superman 2025. Now, as DC redefines itself, fans and critics alike are debating the exciting possibility of integrating Robert Pattinson's acclaimed portrayal of Batman into this revitalized universe. Now, most of this is clearly speculation and just a lot of social media intrigue, but today we will explore why Robert Pattinson's Batman should be merged into the DCU, as well as examine what the DCU is doing correctly and illustrate how it clearly surpasses the pitfall of the previous DC extended universe. Now, Buffy, what are your thoughts about this speculation of Robert Pattinson's Batman being merged into the DCU, and just what are your takeaways overall of the direction of this universe?
So I think it's very, very interesting. It's very, very clear that Matt Reeves is kind of holding title to this Batman series. And I think, honestly, the series will work perfectly if they kind of just tweak it and kind of delay the DCU Batman if they actually want to include Robert Pattinson in there. I think the only kind of problem with that is Robert Pattinson. Well, he joked about it, but he said that he wanted to retire after playing Batman in the trilogy. So that's something important. Maybe he wouldn't want to play a Batman like years down the line, because if they want to introduce a character like Damian Wayne in there, even if they think about skipping like the other Robins, like Jason Todd and Dick Grayson, you still have to have like a level of maturity with Batman, and currently we do not have that. I think Bruce Wayne, as of now, is an interesting character. He's clearly not fully developed. And I think making this Batman series, like by Matt Reeves, kind of like a prequel series to like the eventual DCU, tie it in together, even if you get a new Batman actor later down the line, which they possibly could do. I think that is actually a really great idea. We've seen series like the MCU before, like Iron Man came out. The most popular Marvel character was like Hulk and Spider-Man, Wolverine, all those guys take it down a notch. And we kind of got introduced to a lot of those guys later on. Hulk wasn't even kind of in the Marvel Cinematic Universe like that for real. Spider-Man got introduced in Civil War. Wolverine's going to get introduced later down the line. So, we've gotten characters that haven't appeared on the front screen like, when the series has started. And I think that's what they could do with Batman. I would like them to go the prequel route, because I think this Batman needs a lot more development for him to at least kind of have a Robin and for him to kind of experience, Gotham on his own. I would like for them to take this Batman series in like a kind of a more fantastical level later down in the series, like probably like movie 3, we get like some more fantastical stuff. Because a lot of Batman villains, they can't do it now because he's grounded in like realism. And, that's kind of a bad thing that a lot of movies kind of picked up on after the Dark Knight series. But he's grounded in realism, so we can't put villains like Clayface, Poison Ivy in there. It's kind of stupid in my opinion. These guys are some of Batman's greatest rogues, and we can't insert them in the movie. So, that's ridiculous to me. But albeit, I think DC is doing a great job, and I kind of have to give a lot of credit to James Gunn. James Gunn, he made 3 really good Guardians of the Galaxy movies. The third one, probably one of the best MCU movies, period. Like, emotional value, fun factor. And, he's came to DC, gave DC more of a thin line, linear perspective and roadmap on how to do things after DC was just stroking the ego of Zack Snyder. Those movies were kind of bad. Batman v Superman in particular. Justice League was awful. So during that era, DC's rep was in the mud. Now they did have, kind of a resurgence, like Aquaman, Wonder Woman. But even then, it still got worse. When those sequels came out, those sequels were butt juice. When The Flash came out, we saw what happened with that. And I'm not even going to mention The Rock. So, DC, they've gotten their Superman K back on. They're looking like they can challenge Marvel. Probably not in the box office, but critically, they are doing that. Superman movie has critically been performing as well as this Fantastic Four movie and the Thunderbolts movie earlier this year. I'm not going to bring up Captain America. I'm going to leave that in behind because that movie isn't good. But, yeah, I think DC is doing great.
Yeah, man, I co-sign. I definitely agree. I feel like what DCEU did, their mistakes made, where they were really trying to replicate a game plan aligned with Marvel. And I feel like you can't really do that. What you have to do is, I think that DCU, what was clear is that they just didn't have a unified creative vision. Trying to compete with Marvel, it was very premature, especially given their success. And they just did not do a good job of establishing those characters, in my opinion. The characters were just not developed. It was very, very rushed. They weren't also able to deliver a solid narrative vision. Like you said, Batman v Superman, that shit was ass. It's just like you're just trying to throw in these characters together hastily, and it's overwhelming and confusing the audience. In contrast, this new DCU has taken a more, in my opinion, thoughtful approach, just like strategically laying down that narrative groundwork and emphasizing coherent storytelling. I feel like the Superman was just a great way to open it up by just getting back to those comic roots, honestly, because that's honestly what the Henry Cavill Superman was lacking. It was trying to make Superman intimidating, and I think that I was kind of talking to you and Jay about this when we were watching the Superman. I feel like the Henry Cavill Superman is really just coming from a standpoint of like the Injustice Superman and just how that did so well as like, you know, trying to make Superman align with Batman. Essentially, I think that we got to the point where maybe it's because of the era where we wanted to say, oh, Superman is corny, he's not cool, but it's like that's honestly what made him a fan favorite character and probably the greatest superhero of all time. Like Superman comic is still the highest selling comic of all time. So I think that that's honestly what ended up derailing that universe, as well as, like you said, just giving Zack Snyder extremely too much creative control in his vision and just straying away from what these superheroes are supposed to be, which are comic representations and fictional characters, making them too realistic. And that's another thing I think that the Dark Knight trilogy also kind of demerits Batman, is, like you said, not providing those fantastical elements, which are there. They make Batman essentially seem like a glorified police officer, and that's not really what he's supposed to be. I think the Robert Pattinson Batman, you can do that and get away with it in that movie, and I think that movie is tasteful and just provides a different perspective. But yeah, I would like to see kind of where they take it, because if they just kind of continue to keep the movie similar, then it's gonna take away from what it could potentially be. Now, I'm a little disappointed that like it doesn't look like this Robert Pattinson Batman is going to be integrated in the DCU. I feel like that would be phenomenal, because I think that it's just an excellent opportunity to provide some nuance within that universe. And like you said, these movies have been critically acclaimed. And even in that movie, there's a lot of sophisticated detective storytelling, which you need to have in a Batman franchise. And it also had a lot of emotional complexities to it that I feel like Dark Knight had, but I feel like this was just a little bit different. Because really all you see in Batman Begins is you kind of see like, you know, the push and pull between Bruce Wayne and Alfred and all of these other characters. But I think that they just kind of dove into that a little bit better in The Batman by making it more realistic with all of that. So I do think that if you merged Pattinson's Batman, that DC could like really leverage the existing audience loyalty, the narrative coherence. Like, because you have the fans that they're going to be gaining from the Superman movie is going to be completely different. And if you were able to bring those together, I feel like that could be very, very special. But I don't really mind the direction that it looks like they're going to go into, which is kind of keeping both of these superheroes like in different universes and potentially bringing in like a different type of Batman. I don't really know how I feel about that, but I will just give these guys the benefit of the doubt and let them cook. Feel what I'm saying? But I think that they're off to a pretty good start because they're getting back to those comic roots. Because, bro, DCU, it was like, okay, it's like we're trying to basically stand up against Marvel. You're not going to stand up against Marvel. You've gotten off to a bad start. They've already had the edge up on you. So you have to be innovative. Nobody wants a second coming to a completely different, like DC is different than Marvel. The characters are different. The villains are different. It's just different. So you have to make something that's going to be in more alignment with the characters, fictional characters. And I feel like that's what they didn't do correctly. And then there were just a lot of failures. I think that they just kind of more so focused on just having a lot of big names and generating a lot of money in the box office instead of making a good product. I think that's what the Superman does. Doesn't have a long runtime. It just focused on making a good product. Like, no, we don't need a fucking 3-hour movie. We just need something of substance. I think that the DCU's strategy is more healthy, is more transparent, And it just provides a better cinematic ecosystem. And I think that they got off to a great start with the villains. Like, let's look at the villains from the Batman. People like to kind of downplay the Riddler. I thought he did a great job. I thought that the Penguin, and we saw the show, The Penguin, which is phenomenal. That was a great depiction. Superman, Lex Luthor, is probably a standout in terms of a fictional depiction of a character this year for me. He was hilarious. I really enjoyed what I saw with him on camera. I thought it was fantastic. So that's honestly what, when we think of DC, we think of the villains. Like, yes, we think of, Batman, Superman, but they always have had phenomenal villains. And I feel like that's what the DCEU missed gravely. They did not have good villains, in my opinion. Like the Lex Luthor depiction, and don't even really want to get into detail with that. But yeah, man, I think that they have a great opportunity. Like, they basically have the blueprint of looking at everything that the DCEU did incorrectly, with the rush planning, creative interference, weak storytelling, emotional disconnection. And by contrast, the DCU, they offer a refreshing, strategic, and thoughtful approach. Now, integrating Robert Pattinson's successful Batman portrayal, it could further bolster this promising new era, but it doesn't necessarily have to. They're already on a good start with what they already have. I'm also, looking forward to what they can do with the Supergirl representation of having Millie Alcock. I think she's a phenomenal actress as well with her work in House of the Dragon. That was my first time being aware of her. So I'm actually really excited for that portrayal as well as what we saw with, guys like Mr. Terrific and Green Lantern. I really liked what I saw in that with just the cameos. That was pretty good as well. So yes, it's something that I would enjoy because of just how different the Robert Pattinson Batman depiction is compared to Superman. I just feel like if they were able to tie that in together, Buffy, that would be really, really cool. But doesn't look like it's going to happen, though.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the kind of most important critiques that people are saying that are kind of not in favor of, like, portraying Robert Pattinson as the DCU Batman. They're saying, oh, the tone doesn't fit. But, me, I've always believed that, Batman and Superman, they're diametrically opposed. Like, Superman's obviously portrayed to be like the sun, and Batman's like the night. If you look at Gotham City and Metropolis, it's like night and day. So I thought, the people that are just kind of complaining about the tone not fitting, that was kind of the people that I was a little more upset about, because it's like, dog, that's the whole point of Batman and Superman. Batman's a loner. Everybody knows this, and Superman is a Boy Scout. So, even if their worlds aren't similar, the whole point and why the relationship works, good in the comics, animated movies, and pretty much, all of that stuff is because they're so different. So I've never really liked that crowd that said that. I'm kind of in favor of how different, Robert Pattinson's Batman is than, Superman. I think this Superman, he is a little goofy, but he's not overly like corny or anything. And, this Batman, he's kind of a loner, but, these next couple of films, it's really important on, like, what kind of villains they have between, like, they put in like Hugo Strange or like, the Court of Owls in one of these sequels, because we're going to get some more character development from, Bruce Wayne, because he can't stay in his own shell. Now, maybe he does. I don't think so, but he can't stay in his own shell like he did in that first Batman movie. So I think, that's my important takeaway of it. I think this can work. Tones don't matter. I think it'll be an advantage that, there's such a stark difference between both of them.
I completely agree. I think that's a fantastic point, because they've left a lot on the bone for what they can potentially do with this Batman. Court of Owls would be fantastic. Like, that would just be some phenomenal work. I would love to see that. I think that there's a lot of potentiality for them to do that with kind of just some of the hints that they threw out there with the backstory of, like, what Thomas Wayne has done. They have an opportunity to really take that and do something very powerful with it. So I would also be open to that too.